Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenmara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight we are going to go over the Occult and Crochet series that I've been working on. And not actively live crocheting, unfortunately. I'm having to redevelop or replan some of my how I want to run the stream for that. But the shawl that I have been working on for the last several weeks, months if you want to go there, is finally completed. It comes down to a nice point at the very bottom, but it goes into this beautiful deep rose color. I'm not sure if you can see all the color with my background the way it is, but it's finally done. And this one and one other one will be going up on my website, link in the description, in the next week or so. And then you can also sign up, if you go to that website, for my mailing list by joining that page. And then I only email out once a month, maybe 2 times a month depending on what's going on. But I also have some other cool products that are going live this month, and then some exclusive limited time stuff seasonally that will be going up in September. So if you're interested, definitely hop over there and check that out. Otherwise, we're going to go back to why we're all here, which is the podcast I'm working on. The Occult and Crochet podcast that I'm trying to build is a little bit of talk at the beginning about different crochet stuff I'm working on. Maybe one day having it where I can actually do it on screen when my lighting is fixed in a different camera angle. But for now, that was the crochet, so now on to the occult. And tonight's topic of discussion is a gentleman by the name of Arthur Edward Waite. And most of us know about him as one of the 2 creators of the Smith-Waite tarot deck, or as it's more commonly known, the Rider-Waite deck. But what else do you know about him? He's an interesting guy, and over the time that I have read some of his work and researched him, reading his work kind of made me not as impressed with him, and then researching him out, I figured out why I wasn't as impressed as with some of these other ones that I've talked about. He's not one that I would classify as a favorite. Good researcher, not denying that. I mean, we wouldn't have this little guy here. This is the holographic one, so it's really shiny. If it wasn't for him, and a lot of our other decks wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for him and Pixie Coleman Smith. But as a person, probably not one of the better people that I have read or researched so far. There's other ones that are way worse, I know, but to this point, not one of my favorites. So, let's hop in here and see who this gentleman is. Arthur Edward Waite, or A.E. Waite, and I will continue just to call him Waite after this, was born in October of 1857 in a town called Brooklyn, New York. And I found this interesting as I was figuring out where he was born. What was with New York during the 1800s and spiritualists? I mean, there were a pile of them, all from New York at this time. The Fox sisters, the William Miller, this gentleman. There's a whole bunch of other ones that I haven't talked about yet. But yeah, New York was a popular place for spiritualism in the 1800s. Waite lost his father, Captain Charles Waite, when he was quite young, and after his father's death, his mother, Emma Lovell, moved the household back to her hometown in England. This is where Waite spent the majority of his childhood, and from the sources that I had found, they had some money. They were financially secure because he went to a very small private school, what they would call an exclusive school in London, so he had private tutors, and so there was some money involved. Around the age of around the age of 13, Waite went to St. Charles College, and he went there for 2 terms, and then was trained enough that he could leave school for a clerking job, which is kind of impressive considering he was probably not very old at that time. So, during their stay in London, I think that's where it ended up, yeah. Waite's mother, Emma, decided that she was converting to Catholicism, which is fine, no big deal. And the whole family decided that, well, Mom did it, so the rest of us should. And so they all became Catholic in 1863, and I just thought that was an odd little side note that a couple of different references tossed that in, like it was, and I'm not belittling it, but in the course of what I could find about Waite's life, that was just an odd tidbit to throw in there, so I tossed it in here. Waite was drawn into the metaphysical community world around this time, around 1874. He started off primarily with the concept of psychicism, the reading thoughts, telling the future, and he really got into it when his sister died, and that's what happened in 1874 that kind of triggered his, I have to figure out what happened on the other side. Cue the Fox sisters back in the 1850s. But this led him to a deeper research into these subjects. Eventually, he found the work of another occultist who, for all intents and purposes, influenced pretty much everyone that came out of the ceremonial magic community, and that was Eliphas Levi, or Levi. And I do want to go over him. I have a couple of his books myself in my storage unit, which I would love to dig out and actually be able to show you which ones I'm talking about. He's another interesting character. We'll get into him later. But eventually Waite found the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Here we go again with some more Golden Dawn. And I'll get into kind of the basics of the Golden Dawn after I introduce probably one more person, just because I want to lay some foundational work as to what this thing, how it started, the chaos that was involved at its beginning, and what it blossomed into after having some things fall apart. But we'll get into the Golden Dawn later. And I tried to build all these guys together so they're oddly connected in a way, kind of trying to stay consistent with who I'm bringing up at this point. His first time he joined the Golden Dawn was in 1891, and then he left in 1893. There wasn't really a clear as to why he left. I think it was one of those things where he felt led to leave. Not sure what that means. But he never did stay away for very long, because in 1896 he joined again. But this go-round was different in a lot of ways. He made it through the outer order, the first 5 degrees, and into the innermost order in 1899. But unlike some of the others in the lodge, which is interesting, they went Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, Freemasons, Golden Dawn or Freemasons societies, then Golden Dawn. He started Golden Dawn, Freemasons, and then the Societies Rosicruciana in Anglia. So he did it backwards. But he joined the society in 1902. So he Golden Dawn in 1896, the Freemasons a couple of years later than that, and then the society in 1902. From what I could find, again, and I almost wonder, this is just a theory, if being tied to the Freemasons kept a lot of their personal life out of, or their metaphysical life out of the papers or record. Just like with Woodman and Walcott, there wasn't a lot, Westcott, there wasn't a lot there on Waite, but I noticed that there was a fair amount, these details. You joined the Freemasons, and all of a sudden the string went, or the map went from pretty broad to like, here's just a thin thread, and that's all you're allowed to see. I don't know, it could be something to do with their secrecy, and he just didn't write as much about his personal life, no one else wrote about him. It just was interesting that when he joined that, it kind of thinned how much was out there. But anyway, from what I could find, in 1903, Waite did start his own independent and rectified order. That's what the title of the group was. This order caused upheaval and chaos within the Golden Dawn proper, because he was basically trying to steal some of their ideas to build his own thing, but not give them the credit or not hive off of it like a proper coven would hive off. Now, during this time, there was a lot of upheaval. The early 1900s was not a good time for the Golden Dawn, and I won't point the finger directly at Waite for starting the chaos that led to the Golden Dawn's fracture, but I will say from a few different places that I was researching, including books of his and others that I've read, he did play an active part in the original order's falling apart. So, not the greatest person, we'll just go there. It was also at this time that he doubled down on his Freemason practices, coming to believe that they were the only way, nice cult mentality he's building here, to the secret traditions of spiritual enlightenment and magic. Not quite accurate. And it's one way you can look at it, but his arrogance and his egotism at this time chased a lot of people away, people who could have been very beneficial for him building this path he was on. But the way he went about it, he became so caustic during this time, and it shows up in his writings too, which I'll go into. It was not one of his better moments, we'll just call it that. After Waite left the order for the second time in 1914, things actually settled down in the Golden Dawn, and that's the reason I say he had an active role in it. I just don't know if he started it or how far he went with it, but he was quite active in its the first time it fell apart. But what he did was severe enough that the original Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was almost lost. And I mean almost lost to the point where if it wasn't for one person, and I'm talking, he labored at this, talking to Mathers, talking to other people, getting the original references, and then immediately publishing it as soon as he completed the manuscripts, and also buried himself in studying and understanding the other aspects of the Golden Dawn's practices, we would not even know who this group is today. And that is probably one of the most important people in my mind to modern day occultism, although not everyone has heard of him, but he is, to me, one of the best. He was the secretary to the greatest, in my mind, occultist in the last 200 years, and that's Aleister Crowley. But his secretary was a gentleman by Israel Regardie, and that's who I want to introduce in the next week or two, or the next episode or two of this podcast, because once I introduce him, then I can go on to explain further into the Golden Dawn as I understand it. I'm not a member, but I have researched it, and I have done a lot of the practices in my own life. But we wouldn't have any of what we have today, and I do mean zero, if it wasn't for Israel Regardie. There are people who tell you, my Golden Dawn lineage goes back. No, it doesn't. The Golden Dawn popped up in the late 1800s. They all hived off of the original, but if it wasn't for Regardie, none of them would exist today, because it was that close to being lost with whatever Waite was tied up in. Like I said, not my favorite person. But once Waite was out of the Golden Dawn, he started another lodge, and that was the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross. Not Rosicrucianism by any stretch, but it was another hive off. And there are still people today who practice that version. It's loosely tied to a Golden Dawn base. But he formed this in 1915. So, like I said, he had his own ideas, which is fine. I have no argument with that. But he wanted to convert an entire other lodge that was already moving into his version of it. Make your own, but don't steal it from someone else. Like, seriously. Anyway, also part of the reason he had such a hard time in the lodge was his exceptionally cynical attitude towards magical rituals for the sake of magic. And this is another one of my problems with him. He believed that the ritual was only a way to understand the divine, i.e. more religious, not magic. He was not wrong in a point. I will give him this. Because doing rituals, especially those who are working with spiritual enlightenment, like the ones that the Golden Dawn used, even if you're using them for a magical purpose, you're actually elevating yourself in a spiritual way. You can't work a spiritual ritual and not have aspects of a magical experience occur at the same time. In the Golden Dawn, they're almost one and the same. You don't do one without the other. They're all kind of together. He viewed magic as less than. Fine, but why did you join a magical lodge then? Anyway, he went on to he didn't see it that way in the slightest. And so he went on to kind of rattle their cage until he left, and then he decided to write more spiritual versions of those damned rituals. Okay, well, you didn't, because I've read your stuff, you stole it, and you didn't change much. You took out, like, the magical aspect of it, where you're doing something to earn a bigger paycheck, you just take the paycheck out. So you did the entire ritual for what purpose? Just, yeah, it was weird. Anyway, Waite was a writer, and he wrote several books that were well received amongst mystical lodges of that time. But his attitude wasn't the greatest, and he had a bad habit of belittling others in the community because they were not as enlightened as he was, and he was the only one who was on the right path, and follow him, and blah, blah, blah. His citings of sources was also not the best. He had a bad habit of leaving out where he got his information. Topics that he wrote about, though, and they are still highly influential today. There's been a few people who have annotated to kind of give sources as to where he got some of his material, which is good. And there's some links in the description of stuff that I honestly can recommend because I've read them. And those topics are books on divination, esotericism, which is the spiritual aspect of metaphysics, Freemasonry, Kabbalah, ceremonial magic, alchemy, and he even researched into, I never could find any source that he actually practiced this, but he did research it heavily, which is the dark arts, demon summoning, demonology, things like that. Some books were generally reference materials, others were manuals on practices. So, and one of the books is this little guy right here. It's not little, it's pretty thick. This is actually a reference guide, weirdly enough. He kind of goes through the versions of different black magic, what he called black magic. I'll say that right up front. Because he talks about, like, magical rituals. Not a big deal. But transcendental magic, that's not black magic. But he called it black because it wasn't his version. Then you actually have, like, the different grimoires. He referenced several of them, and some of them, I will 100% agree, are very dark. He goes over basically some of the rites, the initiations, preparing the person and what was involved, which is standard grimoire work. But then he goes through things like the mysteries of theurgy. Well, theurgy is god magic. Not sure how that's black magic. Then he goes into the demonic summonings and things like that, which I, again, don't recommend. Let's see what else we got going on here. And then he just kind of goes through different other, but it's mainly a book on references, because you're getting a couple of sigils in here, you're getting a couple of notes, very, very minimal conjurations. This is not a grimoire, this is a reference book. But when you read through it, I've read this one a couple of times because I just want to try to understand him better. You start to see his condescending attitude towards it, where, yes, this is what you do, but it's basically like, but why would you? Ew, gross. It bugs me just because you were at a time when you had people who were willing to work with you, and they were willing to listen, but your attitude made that difficult for them. So, and then I'm going to get into one more thing here that makes me not happy about him. But this is kind of the wrapping up of his metaphysical work, is the next one. Most people know Waite for one thing. Even if they know nothing else about him, they know him for one thing. And that is this, the tarot. He wanted to update the tarot from only having the 22 major arcana cards illustrated to having the entire deck illustrated. Very, very lofty goal, very, very well thought through, and he worked very closely with someone else. And this undertaking, he enlisted the artist Pamela Pixie Coleman Smith. And I've already went over her in her own life in an earlier video. Again, there was not much out there, but what I did find showed me a woman who is well ahead of her time, who knew how to stand on her own 2 feet when the world really truly wanted to squash her, because she was a half African American and half something else, I can't remember, it was Jamaican or Haitian woman, and she owned a printing company. She was an amazing artist. There's still displays of her art at different schools that it rotates around. But her number one crowning achievement as far as her art was this little deck. Not the holographic one, it's the only one I have. And what I will say again, because it's through my digging around I did find this out, and it makes me very, again, not happy with Waite. What Waite and Ryder did, to me, was gross. Yes, Waite had the idea, Ryder published it, but you wouldn't have anything if it wasn't for Pixie. The original deck was supposed to be called, and there's some reconstructions that have went back to this name, but it was supposed to be the Smith-Waite deck. Artist, Mystic. Don't get me wrong, Coleman was also a Golden Dawn member and a few other Mystic practices, so she wasn't outside of the Mystic, but it was Waite's idea. She was the artist for it, and let me just throw it out there again real quick for you. If you don't have the art, the tarot becomes a little bit more difficult to interpret when you're looking at 6 sticks on a card versus the 6 of wands, or 6 cups on something versus the actual 6 of chalices. She brought the tarot to life with her illustrations. Ryder took her name off the title, and Waite was quite okay with it. Matter of fact, he said it wasn't a big deal because, well, yeah, time period has a lot to do with this, but it wasn't impressive. I was not, when I found out that he actually knew that they were going to do it and put his basically stamp of approval on it, that was bull as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, you know, simple things like take the name off the person who did all the illustrations and infused amazing beauty and powerful messages into the art and the cards, but he's the man, so he'll take all the credit. Yeah, not cool. Anyway, in a non-magical life, Waite was married, then widower, and then remarried, and nothing metaphysical from this area, and not much else is known. There's one reference I found to him having a daughter, but I didn't find out if there was anything else as far as more children, but there was one reference to a daughter. Again, why not more information about these guys? That wasn't that long ago. Anyway, another interesting little tidbit about this is H.P. Lovecraft is said to have fashioned one of his characters from The Thing on the Doorstep. Creepy story, give you nightmares for a few days if you haven't read it yet. And he named one of the characters after Waite, which is interesting. And that's some speculation today. There hasn't been confirmation of that I have found. If you have confirmation, please let me know in the comments. That would be awesome. But it is an entertaining little tidbit if it's true. As with all things, Waite's life came to an end in May of 1942. He was buried in, and I apologize for people who live here because I'm probably going to murder this name, Bishopbourne, Kent, where he had spent the last of his remaining years, and then he was buried in a churchyard, they said, in that town. First of all, that's interesting because you were buried in a churchyard, you were an occultist, you joined the Freemasons, but you weren't buried in a cemetery, you were specifically buried in a churchyard. maybe it's to clean his soul. I don't know. But that's where he ended up. So, let's see where we're at here. This one, again, wasn't a very long one. Unfortunately, there was just not a lot there. I spent several days double checking and going over, and there's just, even going to sites dedicated to the Golden Dawn, dedicated to the tarot, there's not a lot about Waite that I could find. I found more about Pixie Coleman Smith than I did about him, so who knows. But again, this was probably his most important contribution to the metaphysical world that we would call today. And there are a couple of books down below that you can check out. Like I said, the Book of Black Magic, this guy here, it's a reference book. Kind of goes over the basics, and I will say he at least is thorough in what he does. You'll notice when you read it, there's a couple of sentences and the way he tweaks a word here and there as he's talking about them that makes you like, that's not right, especially if you already have a background in some of this stuff, not so much the demonic part, but the other stuff. You'll start to scratch your head going, not quite, buddy, but that's neither here nor there. Then there's the Holy Kabbalah. He did a very good research on that. I will not knock him for that. He still has those little condescending notes in there, but the overall research itself is really well done, and it's worth just checking out if you're interested in the more metaphysical aspects, the magical aspects of the Kabbalah. And when I use the term magic, it's how we would spell it out today, with a magic with a K, because why is my phone? Because it's a different form. We're talking about not illusions like Siegfried and Roy. We're talking about actual big-time occult mysticism at that point. But that's the kind of stuff that he was researching, and he did some really good job of working through some of that. So, if you're interested in that, you can check those links out down below. If you're interested in the shawl that I showed at the beginning, or any of the other crocheted stuff, you can check it out on my website, mysticjenmara.com, linked in the description as well. With that, please like if you enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button if you're new here, share this if there's other people that you think might enjoy kind of a little glimpse into the history of some of the stuff I've went over so far, and comment, let me know what you think. If there's anything new that's about Waite that I haven't found, which is awesome. There are some biographies out there, and I have not read those, full disclosure, but I don't know how much more they can find than what you can root around online for, but things like that. Anyway, we will talk to you guys later. Have a great rest of your week, and I will see you in the next video.